Emir's blood-curdling screams for help echoed through the remote space station's corridors as she lay crushed under a mountain of debris. But only one responded. One human. Brian Evans, a skilled but solitary engineer, was the only one of his kind aboard the Tholian outpost orbiting Vexar Prime. Day after day, the proud warrior race subjected him to endless torrents of abuse and discrimination, viewing his mere presence as an affront to their strict hierarchy. But when Emir's desperate pleas reached his ears from a crumpled mass of metal in a forgotten corner of the station, Brian knew he had to act. Every fiber of his being compelled him to claw away the twisted bulkheads and save the dying Tholian female, cultural taboos be damned. He tore into the wreckage with a frenzied determination, sweat pouring down his face, racing against time to free Emir before her life slipped away. The stakes couldn't be higher. If he failed, an innocent soul would perish, and the already strained relations between humans and Tholians could snap like an overstretched cable. As Brian strained to shift the crushing weight pinning Emir's broken body, he heard the heavy footfalls of approaching Tholian soldiers. Leading them was Zoltar, Emir's brother and a high-ranking military officer, hell-bent on letting his own sister die to preserve their callous societal norms. But Brian Evans was a human, compassionate, determined, and unafraid to defy an alien culture's cruelty. He knew that the next few minutes would decide not only Emir's fate, but also the future of human-Tholian relations. With gritted teeth and unwavering resolve, he prepared to do whatever it took to save her life. Brian disregarded the menacing snarls of Zoltar's men, refusing to abandon Emir to her fate. He wedged his hands under the crushing bulkhead, muscles straining as he fought to create an opening. With a primal roar of exertion, he hoisted the twisted metal just high enough for Emir's broken body to slide free. As Brian reached down to help Emir stand, Zoltar's subordinates lunged forward to tackle the human. But Emir, strength fading fast, pushed herself in front of Brian and barked an order for them to halt. The soldiers froze as Emir's superior rank compelled their obedience, even as they bristled with barely contained fury. But Emir's injuries quickly overwhelmed her, legs crumpling beneath her as she collapsed. Brian caught her before she struck the deck, insisting that he carry her to the station's medical bay for urgent treatment. Zoltar wrestled with his warring emotions, disgusted by the idea of a human touching his sister, but desperate to save her life. With a curt nod, he permitted Brian to bear Emir to the medical facility. Brian cradled Emir's limp form as he raced through the corridors, drawing shocked stares and hateful whispers from the Tholian crew. They gawked at the unprecedented sight of a lowly human coming to the aid of a Tholian warrior, unable to comprehend such an act of selfless compassion. Bursting into the medical bay, Brian called for immediate assistance, only to be met with icy refusal from the Tholian staff. They recoiled at the notion of treating a patient tainted by human contact, their prejudice overriding their medical oaths. Incensed, Brian launched into an impassioned tirade, demanding that they put aside their bigotry and fulfill their duty to save Emir's life. Drawing upon his extensive knowledge of Tholian physiology, gleaned from his time maintaining the station's systems, Brian outlined the specific treatments Emir required. The lead medic, taken aback by the human's expertise and unwavering dedication, grudgingly relented. But as he prepared to begin Emir's care, he ordered Brian to leave the medical bay at once, unwilling to tolerate the human's presence a moment longer. Brian felt numb as he exited the medical bay, the Tholian medic's harsh glare still burning into his back. He had done the right thing, the human thing, but now he would face the consequences of defying an alien culture's cruel expectations. His fears were confirmed as he stepped into the corridor and found himself surrounded by a squad of heavily armed Tholian security officers, their weapons trained on his chest. At their head stood Zoltar, his eyes blazing with barely contained rage. "Human, you are under arrest for violating our most sacred cultural norms and interfering with Tholian society," Zoltar snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You will be detained and face the full weight of our justice system." Brian stood his ground, meeting Zoltar's gaze unflinchingly. "I did what was necessary to save an innocent life. If your culture condemns compassion, then perhaps it is your culture that needs to change. As the security officers moved to seize Brian, a booming voice echoed through the corridor. "Stand down, all of you." The Tholians froze, and Brian turned to see the station's commander, Kresnik, striding towards them. Known for his pragmatism and open-mindedness, Kresnik was an anomaly among the rigid Tholian hierarchy. "Commander, this human has committed grave offenses against our people," Zoltar protested, but Kresnik silenced him with a sharp gesture. "I have reviewed the station's security footage, and what I saw was a display of bravery and selflessness that reflects the best of both human and Tholian values," Kresnik declared. "This man risked his own life to save one of our own, and for that, he deserves our gratitude, not our condemnation." Turning to Brian, Kresnik placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will face no charges for your actions today. I will personally ensure that Ymir receives the best possible care." Zoltar, his face contorted with humiliation and fury, spun on his heel and stormed off, his men trailing behind him. As they disappeared around a corner, Brian heard Zoltar's parting words, "This is not over, human. You will pay for your transgressions." As the tension in the corridor dissipated, Kresnik led Brian to a quiet alcove. "I have been concerned about the growing tensions between our people and the other races on this station, particularly the humans," Kresnik confided. "Your actions today could serve as a catalyst for change, a bridge between our cultures." Brian listened intently as Kresnik continued. "I would like to offer you a new role as a cultural liaison between the Tholians and the other species on the station. Your unique perspective and willingness to stand up for what is right could help foster a more harmonious working environment for all." Brian hesitated, the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. But as he considered the opportunity to make a real difference, to break down the barriers of prejudice and misunderstanding, he knew he could not refuse. "I accept," Brian said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's work together to build a better future for everyone on this station." Embracing his new role as cultural liaison with fervor, Brian threw himself into organizing a series of workshops and events aimed at fostering understanding between the station's diverse inhabitants. He transformed an unused cargo bay into a makeshift conference room, adorning the walls with vibrant tapestries depicting scenes from various alien homeworlds. On the first day of the workshops, Brian stood before a small scattered audience, undeterred by the meager turnout. He began with a heartfelt speech about the importance of cooperation and respect in their shared community, his voice resonating with conviction. As the days passed, word of Brian's genuine efforts spread through the station's corridors like a gentle breeze. Tholians, who had initially boycotted the events, began to trickle in, their curiosity piqued by tales of the humans' earnest dedication. Among the growing crowd of attendees, one figure stood out, Ymir, now fully recovered from her injuries. She sat in the front row, her eyes alight with determination as she listened intently to Brian's words. After each session, Ymir lingered to discuss the day's topics with Brian, her insights and support proving invaluable. Together, they brainstormed new ideas for bringing the station's inhabitants closer together. Ymir leveraged her influence within the Tholian hierarchy to encourage more of her people to participate, her unwavering belief in Brian's mission inspiring others to follow suit. As Brian and Ymir worked side by side, a deep friendship blossomed between them. They bonded over shared meals in the station's mess hall, swapping stories of their vastly different upbringings and cultures. In quiet moments between workshops, they confided in each other their hopes and fears for the station's future, their laughter echoing through the once tense corridors. But even as Brian's initiatives gained momentum, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Zoltar, consumed by bitterness and resentment, wove a web of lies and deceit among the Tholian workers. He whispered poisonous rumors that Brian sought to undermine their culture and erode their influence, his words seeping into the minds of those who had only just begun to open up to change. In the station's dimly lit maintenance tunnels, Zoltar hunched over a flickering console, his fingers flying across the keys as he rewrote subroutines and altered system parameters. With each line of code, he sowed the seeds of chaos, orchestrating malfunctions and disruptions that he knew would be blamed on Brian's efforts. As the sabotage took hold, Brian found himself facing a rising tide of hostility from the very Tholians he had worked so hard to reach. Equipment failures and communication breakdowns plagued his workshops, eroding the fragile trust he had built. Unaware of Zoltar's machinations, Brian redoubled his efforts, pouring his heart and soul into mending the fraying bonds between the station's inhabitants. But with each setback, the whispers of discontent grew louder, the shadows of suspicion lengthening across the station's halls. In the face of mounting adversity, Brian turned to Ymir for support, finding solace in their shared resolve. Together, they vowed to uncover the source of the disruptions and clear Brian's name, knowing that the fate of the station's unity hung in the balance. As they delved deeper into the mystery, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked beneath the surface, a malevolent force working to unravel the delicate tapestry of understanding he had woven. With Ymir by his side, he steeled himself for the challenges ahead, determined to protect the dream of a united community against all odds. As Brian delved deeper into the mysterious accidents plaguing the station, an insidious pattern emerged. A ruptured coolant line in the human living quarters, a malfunctioning airlock in the joint research lab. Each incident, seemingly isolated, struck at the heart of the fragile cooperation between Tholians and humans. Ymir joined Brian in his investigation, her keen Tholian senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the station's atmosphere. Together, they pored over maintenance logs and security footage, searching for any clue that might lead them to the culprit behind the sabotage. But with each new piece of evidence they uncovered, the tensions on the station only escalated. Tholian workers cast suspicious glances at their human colleagues, while the human crew members huddled together, whispering of conspiracies and hidden agendas. Brian and Ymir's efforts to unravel the mystery were met with resistance at every turn. Tholian technicians stonewalled their requests for information, while human workers, once eager to participate in Brian's cultural exchange initiatives, now shied away from his presence. As they worked late into the station's artificial night, Brian stumbled upon a coded transmission buried deep within the communication logs. With Ymir's help, he decrypted the message, revealing a shocking truth. A secret Tholian terrorist group, the Tholian Liberation Front, was operating on the station, and their leader was none other than Zoltar himself. The group's manifesto, laid bare in the intercepted transmission, called for the expulsion of all non-Tholian workers from the station and the reassertion of Tholian dominance. Brian's blood ran cold as he realized the depths of Zoltar's hatred and the lengths he would go to achieve his goals. Determined to bring their findings to Commander Kresnik, Brian and Ymir raced through the station's corridors, their hearts pounding with urgency. But as they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with Zoltar and a dozen heavily armed Tholian insurgents. Zoltar sneered at Brian, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You should have left when you had the chance, human. Now you will bear witness to the true power of the Tholian people." Before Brian could react, Zoltar's followers opened fire, their weapons spitting searing bolts of energy. Ymir shoved Brian aside, her body shielding him from the onslaught. She cried out in pain as a blast caught her in the chest, sending her crumpling to the ground. Brian dragged Ymir to cover, his hands slick with her blood. As he cradled her wounded form, Zoltar's voice echoed through the corridor. "I have planted bombs throughout the station's critical systems. In a matter of hours they will detonate, and this facility will be nothing more than a debris field." Zoltar's ultimatum hung in the air like a suffocating fog. "Expel all non-Tholian workers immediately, or watch as your precious station is reduced to ashes. The choice is yours, Commander Kresnik." With Ymir's life hanging in the balance and the fate of the entire station resting on his shoulders, Brian knew he had to act fast. He had to find a way to stop Zoltar, disarm the bombs, and navigate the treacherous political landscape of the Tholian-dominated space station, all while racing against a ticking clock. As he pressed a makeshift bandage against Ymir's wound, Brian's mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger, but he also knew that he could not let Zoltar's hatred and bigotry triumph. Too much was at stake. The lives of everyone on the station, the future of human-Tholian relations, and the very principles of compassion and unity that he had fought so hard to uphold. With a deep breath, Brian steeled himself for the challenges to come, knowing that failure was not an option. With Ymir's blood staining his hands, and Zoltar's ultimatum ringing in his ears, Brian knew he had to act fast. The station's very survival depended on his next moves. He gently laid Ymir down, making sure she was as comfortable as possible, and then raced off to gather allies. Brian's first stop was the quarters of Kix, a brilliant Zephyrian hacker he had befriended during his cultural exchange initiatives. Kix's long, slender fingers danced across the holographic interface as Brian explained the situation. "I can slice into the station's security systems, locate those bombs," Kix said, his compound eyes glinting with determination. "But I'll need time." Next, Brian sought out Thrax, a hulking Chronon warrior with a fierce sense of honor. Thrax listened intently, his craggy features hardening as Brian described Zoltar's treachery. "I will gather my best warriors," Thrax rumbled, hefting his plasma axe. "We will secure the critical areas and protect the innocent." Finally, Brian approached Zin, a lithe Aurelian with an uncanny talent for stealth and infiltration. Zin's iridescent scales shimmered as they nodded in agreement. "I can lead a team to neutralize any threats and keep the civilians safe," Zin said, their voice a sibilant whisper. With his team assembled, Brian outlined their three-pronged plan. Kix would work to locate and disarm the bombs. Thrax and Zin would lead their respective teams to secure key areas and protect the station's inhabitants, and Brian would confront Zoltar directly. As the teams split up to carry out their missions, Brian made his way to the command center, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that Zoltar would be holding Commander Kresnik and other high-ranking officials hostage, using them as leverage to ensure his demands were met. Using his intimate knowledge of the station's layout, Brian managed to slip past the Tholian Liberation Front sentries and infiltrate the command center. As he entered, he saw Zoltar standing triumphantly, his energy blade held to Commander Kresnik's throat. "There the human hero arrives," Zoltar sneered, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Come to watch as I bring the Tholian people to their rightful place of dominance?" Brian stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Zoltar, think about what you're doing. Destroying the station, killing innocent lives. It will only harm the Tholian cause in the long run. Is this really what honor and duty demand of you?" Zoltar's grip on his energy blade wavered slightly as Brian's words struck a chord within him. For a moment it seemed as though Brian might be getting through to the enraged Tholian. But before Zoltar could respond, a group of Tholian Liberation Front extremists burst into the command center, their weapons trained on Brian and the hostages. In the chaos that followed, Brian and Zoltar found themselves fighting side by side, fending off the extremists and protecting the hostages. Energy blasts scorched the air as they took cover behind the command consoles, their differences momentarily forgotten in the face of a common enemy. As the battle raged around them, Brian couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. If he and Zoltar could work together in this moment of crisis, perhaps there was still a chance for peace and understanding between their people. But the fight was far from over, and the fate of the station still hung in the balance. With time running out and tensions at a breaking point, Brian steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that the next few minutes would decide the future of human-Tholian relations and the lives of everyone on board. As energy blasts ripped through the command center, Brian and Zoltar dived behind a control console for cover. Sweat poured down Brian's face as he returned fire, his heart pounding in his chest. Zoltar snarled as he launched himself at an extremist, slamming the attacker to the ground with a bone-crunching thud. "Kirk's status report," Brian yelled into his comm unit, ducking as a barrage of energy bolts scorched the air above his head. "I've located the bombs." Kix's voice crackled through the comm. Relaying coordinates to Thrax and Zin's teams now. Brian nodded grimly, firing off a series of shots that sent an extremist tumbling to the floor. Thrax, Zin, you copy? Affirmative, Thrax rumbled, moving to disarm explosives. On it, Zin hissed, their voice barely audible over the sound of energy weapons discharging in the background. Brian turned to Zoltar, who was grappling with another extremist. We need to buy them more time. Zoltar grunted in acknowledgement, delivering a crushing blow to his opponent's skull. Seal the command center. Brian raced to the control panel, his fingers flying across the interface. With a hiss of hydraulics, blast doors slammed shut, trapping them inside with the remaining extremists. The battle raged on, Brian's quick thinking and improvisational skills complementing Zoltar's superior combat training. They fought back to back, a human and a Tholian united against a common foe. In the medical bay, Ymir's eyes fluttered open, the sound of distant explosions jolting her back to consciousness. A medic rushed to her side, trying to keep her from sitting up. What's happening? She demanded, wincing as pain lanced through her injured body. The station is under attack, the medic explained hurriedly. The human Brian is trying to stop it. Ymir's eyes widened, a newfound respect and admiration for the human who saved her life surging through her. Despite the medic's protests, she pushed herself off the bed, determination etched across her face. I have to help him, she declared, staggering towards the door. Ymir limped through the corridors, rallying other Tholian workers to her cause as she made her way towards the command center. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find, a ragtag band of allies united by a common purpose. In the command center, Brian and Zoltar were slowly being overwhelmed by the extremists. Energy blasts scorched the walls, consoles exploding in showers of sparks. Just as all hope seemed lost, the blast doors shuddered and burst open, revealing Ymir and her improvised team of Tholian allies. They charged into the fray, energy weapons blazing, turning the tide of the battle. Together they fought with a ferocity born of desperation, slowly subduing the extremists one by one. Across the station, Thrax and Zin's teams raced against time, battling Tholian Liberation Front operatives as they sought to disarm the bombs. Energy blasts illuminated the corridors, the stench of burnt circuitry filling the air. With mere seconds to spare, they succeeded in neutralizing the final explosive, the station shuddering as the threat of destruction dissipated like a half-remembered nightmare. In the aftermath of the crisis, Commander Kresnik surveyed the damage, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and pride. He turned to Brian and his team, who stood exhausted but victorious amidst the wreckage of the command center. Brian looked around at his team, human, Tholian, Zephyrian, Cronin, and Aurelian, and felt a surge of hope for the future. They had fought side by side, their bonds forged in the crucible of battle, and emerged stronger for it. As the station's inhabitants began the long process of rebuilding and healing, Brian knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but with his newfound allies by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that together they could overcome anything. In the aftermath of the crisis, a sense of unity and purpose swept through the station like a cleansing wind. Everywhere Brian looked, Tholians and humans worked side by side to repair the damage wrought by Zoltar's misguided crusade, the once bitter divide between their species now bridged by shared hardship and triumph. Ymir, her wounds healed but her spirit forever changed, threw herself into the rebuilding efforts with a fierce determination. Where once she had viewed humans with disdain, she now saw in Brian a kindred spirit, a being of courage and compassion, who had risked everything to save her people. Together, they labored tirelessly to weave a new tapestry of cooperation, their actions speaking louder than any words ever could. In the station's bustling corridors, Tholians and humans alike paused to offer them nods of respect and gratitude, the once oppressive atmosphere of mistrust and hostility giving way to a tentative but growing sense of camaraderie. Even Zoltar, the architect of so much discord, found himself swept up in the tide of change. In a moment of profound introspection, he saw the folly of his extremist views, the hatred and fear that had blinded him to the true strength of unity. With a heavy heart, he sought out Commander Kresnik and publicly renounced his ties to the Tholian Liberation Front, vowing to dedicate himself to the cause of peace and understanding. As a gesture of good faith, he volunteered to stand trial for his crimes, accepting the consequences of his actions with a quiet dignity that surprised all who witnessed it. Kresnik, his eyes alight with a newfound sense of purpose, seized upon this moment of transformation to enact sweeping reforms across the station. In a stirring address to the assembled inhabitants, he outlined a bold vision of equality and representation, a future in which every race had a voice and a seat at the table. To oversee this ambitious undertaking, he appointed Brian and Ymir as co-chairs of a newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee, their heroic deeds having earned them the trust and respect of all. With a shared sense of determination, they set to work, their minds and hearts united in the cause of forging a brighter tomorrow. But even as the station basked in the glow of newfound harmony, a shadow loomed on the horizon. A strange vessel, sleek and alien, appeared at the edge of the station's sensors, its intentions unknown. As the ship drew closer, a hail crackled across the command center's speakers, the voice cold and imperious. "We are the Viridians, and we come seeking that which is rightfully ours. The Tholians possess an ancient artifact, a relic of great power and significance to our people. They will surrender it to us or face the consequences." Kresnik's eyes narrowed as he stared at the viewscreen, the image of the Viridian ship filling the display. He turned to Brian and Ymir, his expression grave. "I fear this may be the greatest challenge we have yet faced. The Tholians will never give up their sacred artifact, not without a fight." Brian and Ymir exchanged a worried glance, the weight of their newfound responsibilities pressing down upon them like a physical force. They had fought so hard to bring peace to the station, to bridge the gap between their peoples, and now it seemed that all their efforts might be undone by this new threat. As the Viridian ship loomed ever closer, its shadow falling across the station like a shroud, Brian felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that the days ahead would test them all, that the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build hung in the balance. But as he looked around at the faces of his friends and allies, at the determined set of Ymir's jaw and the steely glint in Kresnik's eye, he felt a flicker of hope. They had overcome so much already, had faced down hatred and fear, and emerged stronger for it. Together they would find a way to navigate this new crisis, to forge a path to peace and understanding, no matter the cost. The fate of the station, and perhaps the entire galaxy, depended on it. Brian's mind raced as he paced the command center, acutely aware of the Viridian ship looming just beyond the station's perimeter. He turned to Commander Kresnik, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "We need to bring the Tholians and the Viridians together to find a peaceful solution before this escalates any further." Kresnik nodded, his brow furrowed. "And how do you propose we do that?" "A diplomatic summit here on the station," Brian replied, his eyes alight with determination. "We're neutral ground, a place where both sides can come together and negotiate without fear." Kresnik considered the proposal for a moment before nodding his assent. "Make it happen, Brian. We can't afford to let this situation spiral out of control." Brian immediately set to work, reaching out to both the Tholian and Viridian leaders, imploring them to come to the table. It was a delicate dance, navigating the complex web of cultural expectations and long-standing grievances, but Brian's experience in bringing together diverse races proved invaluable. As the summit convened, the tension in the air was palpable. Tholian and Viridian delegates eyed each other warily across the conference table, their postures rigid and their words clipped. Brian and his team worked tirelessly to mediate, to find common ground amidst the sea of distrust. But as the negotiations wore on, a startling truth began to emerge. The artifact at the center of the dispute was no mere relic or technological marvel, but something far more sinister. It was a key, a means to unlock an ancient weapon of unimaginable destructive power, capable of reducing entire star systems to ash. Brian felt his blood run cold as the realization dawned on him. The Tholians and the Viridians weren't just vying for control of a sacred object, they were racing to gain a strategic advantage in a conflict that threatened to engulf the galaxy. He turned to Ymir, his eyes wide with horror. "We can't let either side get their hands on that artifact," he whispered urgently. "If they do, millions could die." Ymir nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then we have to make sure that doesn't happen." Together, they hatched a desperate plan. They would steal the artifact from the secure vault where it was being held, spirit it away from the station, and destroy it, ensuring that its terrible power could never be unleashed. They brought their trusted allies into the fold. Kix with his unparalleled hacking skills, Thrax with his unmatched combat prowess, and Zin with their uncanny ability to infiltrate even the most secure facilities. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for their daring heist. But even as they planned and prepared, a new threat emerged from the shadows. Zoltar, the disgraced Tholian extremist, had escaped from custody, driven by a burning desire to seize the artifact for himself. He saw it as the key to restoring Tholian supremacy, to reshaping the galaxy in his people's image. As Brian and his team raced against time to put their plan into motion, they knew that they were walking a razor's edge. One false move, one moment of hesitation, and everything they had worked for could come crashing down around them. With Zoltar lurking in the shadows and the Viridians and Tholians growing increasingly impatient, Brian knew that the next few hours would be critical. The fate of the station, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance, and he was determined to see their mission through to the end, no matter the cost. Kix's fingers flew across the holographic interface, his eyes narrowed in concentration, as he worked to bypass the vault's security systems. Thrax and Zin stood guard at the entrance to the secure corridor, their weapons at the ready, prepared to deal with any threats that might arise. Brian and Ymir, meanwhile, made their way towards the vault itself, their hearts pounding in their chests as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the station's most heavily guarded sector. They had memorized the layout, studied every detail of the security protocols, but still, the weight of what they were about to attempt hung heavy on their shoulders. As they approached the vault door, Brian reached out and gripped Ymir's hand, seeking comfort in the warmth of her touch. She met his gaze, her eyes alight with determination and a hint of fear, and together they steeled themselves for what lay ahead. With a soft chime, the vault door slid open, revealing the artifact within. It was smaller than Brian had imagined, a crystalline sphere no larger than his fist, pulsing with an ethereal blue light. He reached out to take it, his fingers trembling slightly as they closed around its cool surface. But as he lifted the artifact from its cradle, a sudden movement caught his eye. There, lurking in the shadows at the far end of the vault, was Zoltar, his eyes blazing with a manic intensity. In his hand, he held a blaster, its muzzle trained directly on Brian's chest. "Hand over the artifact, human," Zoltar snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea of its true power, of what it means for the future of the Tholian people." Brian felt Ymir tense beside him, her hand drifting towards her own weapon. But he knew that any sudden moves could prove disastrous, could shatter the fragile peace they had worked so hard to maintain. "Zoltar, listen to me," Brian said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "This artifact, it's not a tool for conquest or domination. It's a weapon, one that could destroy us all if we're not careful." Zoltar's laugh was harsh and grating, echoing off the vault's metal walls. "You naive fool," he spat. "You think I care about the consequences? All that matters is the power it represents, the chance to restore my people to their rightful place as the rulers of the galaxy." Brian shook his head, his grip on the artifact tightening. "And how many innocent lives are you willing to sacrifice for that goal? How much blood are you willing to have on your hands?" As the standoff in the vault reached a breaking point, Brian knew that he was running out of options. Zoltar's finger was tightening on the trigger of his blaster, his eyes alight with a manic intensity that spoke of a man with nothing left to lose. Brian's mind raced, searching for a way out, a means to defuse the situation before it escalated beyond control. But as he met Zoltar's gaze, he saw only hatred and a burning desire for power, a twisted reflection of the ideals he had once claimed to uphold. In that moment, Brian made a decision. With a swift, decisive motion, he brought his hand up, the artifact clutched tight in his fist. Zoltar's eyes widened, his finger twitching on the trigger, but before he could fire, Brian brought the artifact down hard on the edge of the vault's control panel. The crystalline sphere shattered, exploding in a blinding flash of blue light. Brian felt a searing pain shoot up his arm as the energy within the artifact discharged, coursing through his body like a bolt of lightning. He heard Zoltar's howl of rage, heard the blaster fire erupt from the barrel of his weapon, but as the world around him dissolved into a haze of pain and confusion, Brian knew that he had done what needed to be done, that he had sacrificed everything to keep the artifact's terrible power out of the wrong hands. As he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness, Brian's last thoughts were of Ymir, of the promise he had made to her to see their mission through to the end. He could only hope that she would forgive him, that she would understand why he had made the choice he did. And then darkness claimed him and he knew no more. As Brian raced through the station's corridors, Kix's voice crackled over the comm. "Brian, I've got bad news. Zoltar and his men are closing in on the vault. You need to hurry." Brian gritted his teeth, his heart pounding in his chest. "Thrax, Zin, what's your status?" "We're holding off the Tholian extremists near the reactor core," Thrax grunted, the sound of energy blasts punctuating his words. "But they're putting up a hell of a fight." "The Viridians are trying to breach the command center," Zin hissed, their voice strained. "We're doing our best to keep them at bay, but we can't hold out much longer." Brian rounded a corner, his mind racing. They were running out of time. If Zoltar or the Viridians got their hands on the artifact, the consequences would be catastrophic. He burst into the vault room, his eyes immediately locking onto the crystalline sphere pulsing with an otherworldly light. But as he reached for it, a searing pain erupted in his shoulder, sending him sprawling to the ground. Brian struggled to his feet, his wound screaming in protest. "Zoltar, you don't understand. The artifact is not what you think it is." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Zoltar sneered, advancing into the room. "With this power, the Tholian people will finally take their rightful place as the rulers of the galaxy." They circled each other, fists raised, the artifact glowing between them. Brian lunged forward, his fist connecting with Zoltar's jaw. The Tholian staggered back, his eyes blazing with rage. They traded blows, each strike fueled by desperation and determination. Brian fought through the pain, his mind focused on a single goal, protecting the artifact, and with it, the fate of the station. Suddenly the vault door hissed open, and Ymir burst into the room, her eyes wide with shock. "Brian, Zoltar, what are you doing?" Zoltar turned to face her, his face twisted with anger. "Stay out of this, sister. This is Tholian business." But Ymir shook her head, her gaze locked on Brian. "No, Zoltar, this is everyone's business. The artifact, it's not a weapon, it's something much more important." Brian nodded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "She's right, Zoltar. The artifact is a source of clean energy, a technology that could change the galaxy, but the knowledge of how to use it has been lost." Zoltar hesitated, his grip on the blaster wavering. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we need to work together," Brian said, his voice growing stronger. "Tholians, Viridians, humans, all of us. Only by combining our knowledge and resources can we unlock the artifact's true potential." As the truth sank in, Zoltar lowered his weapon, his shoulders slumping. All this time, all this fighting, it was all for nothing. Ymir placed a hand on her brother's shoulder. "Not for nothing, Zoltar. We've learned the truth and now we have a chance to make things right." Thrax and Zin appeared in the doorway, their weapons lowered. "Brian, Ymir, the station is secure," Thrax said, his voice filled with relief. "The Viridians and the extremists are standing down." Together, they carried the artifact to the station's reactor core, where Keeks was waiting. With a nod, Brian handed the sphere to the Zephyrian, who placed it gently inside the reactor. There was a blinding flash of light, and for a moment the station shuddered as if it were about to tear itself apart. But then the light faded, and a soft, steady hum filled the air. "It's done," Keeks said, his voice filled with awe. "The artifact has been destroyed, but its energy has been absorbed into the station's systems. We have a clean, unlimited power source." Brian felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but it was bittersweet. He thought of the lives lost, the sacrifices made to reach this moment. Ymir seemed to sense his thoughts, and she squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with understanding. In the days that followed, the station underwent a transformation. Representatives from every race came together, pooling their knowledge and resources to study the artifact's technology. Slowly but surely, they began to unlock its secrets, each discovery bringing them closer to a brighter future. Brian and Ymir worked tirelessly, leading the effort to promote cooperation and understanding among the diverse peoples of the galaxy. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when old tensions threatened to resurface, but they never wavered in their commitment to building a better tomorrow. One evening, as the station's artificial day cycle drew to a close, Brian and Ymir stood side by side, gazing out at the stars through the viewport. The weight of all they had been through hung heavy on their shoulders, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. "We've come so far," Ymir murmured, her hand resting on Brian's arm, "but there's still so much work to be done." Brian nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant points of light. True peace, true progress. They're not easy to achieve, but as long as we keep fighting for them, as long as we stand together. "We can face anything," Ymir finished, a small smile tugging at her lips, "even the unknown." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.